Most people don't regret pellet stove in the first week. They regret it later. When it's cold, when something jams, when the price of pellets jumps and you're already locked in. On paper, pellet stoves look perfect. Clean, efficient, easy, just pour fuel in and walk away. But pellet stoves don't remove the work. They just move it somewhere else. And that somewhere else has a habit of showing up at 11 o'clock at night in January with a blinking error code on the screen that reads like a parking ticket written in Latin. Let's start with the thing people love to brag about. Pellet stoves are clean. I will give them that. You do not carry muddy logs through your house, and that alone makes a lot of people happy right away. No bark scattered across the floor, no little wood chips hiding in your socks, and no surprise bug crawling out like it just signed a lease. Instead, you get bags. Dry, compact, and easy to stack. They sit neatly in a corner instead of turning your storage area into a small lumber yard. You cut the bag open, pour the pellets into the hopper, and the stove takes over from there. It feeds itself slowly and evenly, almost like it knows what it is doing. For someone used to babysitting a fire, that feels like a big upgrade. They also burn efficiently. Most pellet stoves run somewhere between 60 and 80% efficiency, which means more heat from the same amount of fuel and less ash to deal with. You're not constantly cleaning out a mess, and the burn stays consistent instead of jumping up and down. Then there is the steady heat. It does not swing wildly. It just keeps going at the level you set. No waking up in the middle of the night because the fire died down. No rushing to throw in another log half asleep. That is why people like them. It feels easier. It feels controlled. But that easy feeling comes with a trade, and most people do not notice it at first. A pellet stove is not really a fire. That is the first thing you need to understand, even if it sounds strange at first. What you are looking at is a machine that produces fire in a controlled way, not a natural fire doing its thing. Inside that stove, there is a whole system working together. An auger slowly feeds pellets forward. Fans push air in and out. Sensors check temperature. A control board decides how fast everything should run. An igniter starts the flame. It is almost like a small factory built for one job. Now, when all of those parts are working together, it feels effortless. The heat comes out steady, the flame looks clean, and you think you made a smart choice. It runs so smoothly that you forget how many things are involved. But here is the part that catches people off guard. If one small thing stops working, the whole system can stop with it. A sensor gets dirty, the auger jams, or a motor gives up, and suddenly there is no heat. I have seen a man stand in front of his stove, tapping it like it might wake up out of guilt. It did not. A wood stove does not behave like that. You give it dry wood and it burns. It does not care about settings or electronics. It just works. Pellet stoves are like a car. Wood stoves are like a hammer. One is advanced and comfortable, but the other rarely lets you down. And that difference becomes important once you start thinking about real winter conditions. Efficiency is one of the first things people look at. You will hear numbers like 70% or even 80%, and it sounds impressive. It makes it feel like you're getting more heat for less fuel, and on paper that is true. Pellet stoves are built to burn fuel in a very controlled way. Airflow is managed, pellets are fed in at a steady rate, and the burn stays clean and consistent. That is how they reach those higher efficiency numbers. But here is the part that confuses people. Higher efficiency does not always mean the room feels warmer. That sounds wrong at first, but it becomes obvious once you experience it. Pellet stoves mainly heat the air. They push warm air out into the room using fans, and the temperature rises evenly. It is predictable and easy to measure. Wood stoves work differently. But they do not just heat the air, they heat everything around them. The walls, the floor, the furniture, even your clothes. After a while, the whole space holds that heat. I have been in 2 rooms that showed the same temperature on the wall, but one felt colder. The difference was not the number. It was how the heat was sitting in the room. Pellet heat is like standing near a vent. Wood heat is like standing in sunlight. Both will warm you, but one settles in deeper. People who have lived with wood heat for years notice this right away. They are not imagining it. It is a different kind of warmth. And once you notice that difference, you start to care less about percentages and more about how it actually feels to live with. Pellet stoves are not always cheap to run, even though many people expect them to be. That expectation comes from hearing about efficiency and clean burning, but cost depends on more than just how well the fuel burns. A ton of pellets can cost a few $100s, sometimes more depending on where you live. Over a full winter, it is not unusual to go through 2, 3, or even 4 tons. When you add that up, the number can get bigger than people planned for. Now compare that to firewood. If you cut your own, the main cost is time and effort. If you buy it, prices vary, but in many areas it can still come out cheaper over the season. Pellets are different. You are buying a manufactured product. It is packaged, transported, and sold through stores, and that means you are tied to whatever the market decides. You cannot just go out and get more from your own land if prices jump or supply gets tight. That is the part people overlook. Once you commit, you are depending on availability and pricing that you do not control. I remember one winter where pellets were hard to find. People were calling stores every few days, hoping a shipment came in. It felt less like heating your home and more like chasing supplies. Then there is the physical side. People often think they are avoiding work, but they still spend time moving bags. Lifting, stacking, carrying, pouring, it adds up over time. So while pellets can be convenient, they come with a different kind of cost, and that is only part of the full picture. Installation is where a lot of people get surprised, and not in a good way. On the surface, pellet stoves look like the cheaper option compared to a traditional wood stove. You often do not need a full chimney system going through the roof. In many cases, a simple vent through an exterior wall is enough. That sounds like an easy win, but then the real numbers start to show up. The stove itself is not cheap, especially if you go for a higher quality model. Then you add the venting system, the labor, and sometimes electrical work if there is no outlet nearby. In some homes, you may also need to adjust the layout or reinforce certain areas to meet safety requirements. All of that adds up quickly. I have seen people go into it thinking they are making a small upgrade, and then they hit that moment where they stop talking for a second. Well, you can almost see them doing the math in their head, realizing the total cost is higher than expected. And here's the part that really matters. It can take years to recover that cost through savings on heating. Not one winter, not two, sometimes much longer depending on how much you use it and what your other heating options cost. That does not mean it is a bad investment. It just means it is not always a fast one. So if you're counting on quick savings, it is worth slowing down and looking at the full picture before making the decision. Insurance is not the most exciting part of this decision, but it is one of those things that can catch you off guard if you ignore it. A lot of people assume pellet stoves are treated very differently from wood stoves, mostly because they look more modern and controlled. In reality, that is not always the case. Insurance companies often group them together under solid fuel heating. That means they still see a fire risk and they still care about how the unit is installed and maintained. In many situations, the same inspection rules apply whether you are burning logs or pellets. Now, to be fair, pellet stoves do have some safety advantages. The burn is more controlled, there is usually less creosote buildup, and the venting system is often simpler. Those are real benefits. But do not expect your insurance company to treat it like a completely different category. In most cases, your premium will not suddenly drop just because you switch to pellets. Sometimes nothing changes at all. Other times, they may want to inspect the setup before approving it, and that inspection matters. If something looks off, they will catch it. They have seen enough poorly installed systems to know what to look for. So if part of your plan is saving money on insurance, it is better to check first rather than assume. Because what you assume and what actually happens are often two different things, and the next part is something you will deal with every single day. Pellet bags are where the idea of easy heat starts to feel a little different in real life. Yes, they are easier than hauling logs. No argument there. You are not splitting wood or dragging branches through snow, and that alone is a big improvement for many people. But pellets still come in bags, and those bags are not light. Most of them sit around 40 pounds, and you do not just move them once. You bring them home, unload them, stack them somewhere dry, then later you move them again. You carry them into the house, lift them up, and pour them into the hopper. Then you do it again the next day, and the next, and the next. It becomes a routine. I heard one man explain it in a way that stuck with me. By the end of the winter, he felt like he had moved a small mountain just one bag at a time. That sounds like an exaggeration until you go through a full season yourself. At first it feels fine, then your back starts to complain a little, then your knees get involved. Before long, what felt simple starts to feel like work you did not plan for. It is still easier than cutting and splitting wood for most people, but it is not effortless. It is just a different kind of effort, and that difference becomes more noticeable over time. Pellet quality is one of those things people overlook at the start, and then it becomes the thing they talk about all winter. Not all pellets are the same, even if the bags look similar sitting on a pallet. Good pellets burn hot and clean. You get steady heat, low ash, and the stove runs the way it was designed to run. You clean less, adjust less, and overall it feels simple. Then there are the other kind. Bad pellets can change everything. They burn cooler, produce more ash, and sometimes leave behind residue that clogs the system. The flame looks weaker, the heat drops, and suddenly you are opening the stove more often than you expected. Same stove, same setup. Completely different result. I have heard more than one person say their stove worked perfectly until they switched brands. After that, they were adjusting feed rates, kept cleaning more often, and wondering what went wrong. It is not always the stove. Sometimes it is what you are feeding it. It reminds me of putting low-quality fuel into a good engine and expecting it to perform the same. It does not work that way, and the tricky part is that pellet quality can change. A brand that worked well one season may not be the same the next. Supply shifts, materials change, and you end up testing things in the middle of winter. That is not the time you want surprises, and it ties directly into the next issue that can stop everything at once. Power is one of the biggest differences between pellet stoves and traditional wood heat, and it is something many people do not fully think through at the start. Most pellet stoves rely on electricity to run. The auger that feeds the pellets needs power. The fans that move air need power. The igniter that starts the fire needs power. When that electricity is gone, the system simply stops. There is no slow backup mode. It does not keep going at a lower level. It just shuts down. Now, some people prepare for that. They use generators, battery backups, or even solar setups to keep things running. That can work well, and for some homes it makes perfect sense. But it is still an extra layer you have to plan for. You are not just buying a stove anymore. You are thinking about what supports that stove when something goes wrong. Because when the power goes out, it is usually not a calm, sunny afternoon. It is a storm, strong wind, or deep cold. That is when you need heat the most. In that situation, a wood stove keeps doing its job without asking for anything. You light it, feed it, and it runs. No switches, no electronics, no waiting. A pellet stove, on the other hand, just sits there until the power comes back. That difference does not matter on a normal day, but on a cold night it becomes very real. Noise is something people rarely think about before buying, but it becomes part of your daily life once the stove is running. Pellet stoves are not silent machines. They have fans moving air, an auger feeding pellets, and constant airflow through the system. All of that creates sound. It is not loud like a power tool, but it is always there. A steady background hum, sometimes a soft clicking when the auger turns, sometimes a gentle rush of air moving through the unit. At first, most people do not notice it. You are focused on the heat, the convenience, the new setup. But then one quiet evening comes along and suddenly that sound stands out. It is not annoying for everyone. Some people get used to it quickly and stop paying attention. Others find that it changes the feeling of the room. A wood stove behaves very differently. It crackles, pops, it shifts slowly as the wood burns. Those sounds feel natural, almost calming. Like something alive, not something working. One person described a pellet stove as sitting next to a warm air vent all evening. That is a fair comparison. It does the job, but it feels more mechanical. So it really depends on what kind of atmosphere you want in your home. Just do not assume it will be silent, because once you start noticing that sound, it becomes part of the experience whether you like it or not. Pellet heat is steady, wood heat is deep. That is the simplest way to describe it, but the difference becomes very clear once you live with both for a while. A pellet stove pushes warm air into the room using fans. The temperature rises evenly and everything feels controlled. You can set it and expect the room to stay close to that setting. It does its job well, especially if you like consistency. A wood stove works in a different way. It does not just heat the air, it sends heat out into everything around it. The walls warm up, the floor holds heat, even the chair you are sitting in starts to feel warmer after some time. That changes how the whole house feels. I have sat near both types of heat, and the difference is hard to ignore. Pellet heat warms the space, but wood heat warms you directly. It settles into the room instead of just passing through it. On paper, that may not seem like a big deal. In real life, it is. People who have used wood heat for years notice it right away. They do not need a thermometer to tell them something feels different. And once you get used to that deeper, more settled warmth, it can be hard to go back to air that feels heated but not held. Still, it would not be fair to pretend wood heat has no downsides, because it absolutely does. Firewood is work, and there is no way around that. You cut it, split it, stack it, and then you wait. Sometimes you wait a full year just to get it dry enough to burn properly. That alone takes patience, and not everyone has the time or space for it. Then the daily routine begins. You bring wood inside, feed the stove, clean out ash, and keep an eye on the fire. When it is cold, you do this more often. Morning, evening, sometimes in the middle of the night. It becomes part of your schedule whether you like it or not. Some people enjoy it. They treat it like a routine that keeps them active. I have met folks who say splitting wood is better than any gym membership. At least this way, you get heat at the end of it. But not everyone feels that way. For many people, especially as they get older or busier, that routine starts to feel like a burden. That is exactly where pellet stoves step in. They offer a way to keep the heat without handling wood all day long. I have seen people switch to pellets and feel like they finally got their evenings back. No more checking the fire every few hours, no more rushing home to keep the house warm. But here's the pattern that shows up again and again. The people who are happiest with pellet stoves usually do not depend on them for everything, and that difference leads into the next point. Pellet stoves tend to work best as helpers, not as the main source of heat in every situation. That distinction matters more than most people expect when they first look into buying one. As a secondary heat source, they do a great job. They take the edge off the cold, add comfort to the main living area, and reduce how hard your primary system has to work. In that role, they often feel efficient and easy to manage. The trouble starts when people expect one pellet stove to handle the entire house, especially during the coldest part of winter. That is where the limitations show up. In milder weather, they perform well. The heat is steady, the stove keeps up, and everything feels under control. But when temperatures drop hard and stay there, the demand increases. In some homes, the stove ends up running constantly and still struggles to keep every room warm. You start noticing colder corners, rooms that never quite reach the same temperature, or the need to rely on another system anyway. That is not a flaw in the design. It is simply a matter of capacity and conditions. Every heating system has limits. The mistake is assuming it does not, especially when the weather is unpredictable, and once you push a system beyond what it comfortably handles, the small inconveniences start to grow, which leads directly into the part most people underestimate. Maintenance is one of those things that sounds simple until you actually live with it. Pellet stoves do not need constant attention, but they do need regular care if you want them to run properly. You will be cleaning the burn pot, emptying ash, and making sure the airflow stays clear. That is part of normal use. For some people, it becomes a quick routine every few days. For others, especially if the stove is running hard or the pellets are not great quality, it can feel more frequent. That difference catches people off guard. Some owners say it is easy and takes just a few minutes. Others say they are opening the stove often enough that it starts to feel like another chore on the list. Both are telling the truth. It depends on how the stove is used, what fuel you are burning, and how well the system is set up. Then there is the repair side. Some stoves run for years with barely any issues. Others end up needing parts like fans, sensors, or control boards. When that happens, it is not something you fix by throwing in another log. You have to figure out what went wrong or call someone who can, and that is not always easy. In some areas, finding a technician who knows pellet stoves can take time. Time you do not want to spend when the temperature is dropping. That is when small maintenance tasks start to feel a lot more important, and it all leads into the final decision. Pellet stoves are not bad, they're just conditional. If you want clean, controlled, convenient heat, and you're okay with the trade-offs, they can be great. But if you want independence, deep heat, and something that works no matter what, wood still wins. Not modern, not flashy, just reliable, like an old axe that doesn't care about power outages or pellet prices. So before you buy, ask yourself one question. Do you want convenience or do you want control? Answer that honestly. That's the decision. If this helped you avoid a mistake, subscribe.